Good morning to you all. I think we can start. It is a pleasure to greet you and receive you in this workshop. I'd like to give you any information you want regarding the liberalization of the air transport. My name is Diego Silva. I'm in the South American office in Lima, Peru. I remind you that this event will have simultaneous interpretation, so you can show the language of your preference in the world icon. This is the studies of the regulatory impacts of air services for the liberalization of the air traffic in South America and also in the Caribbean, and we are going to show you the benefits. These studies are essential for the traffic of passengers and cargo, more connectivity, new operators, reduce of airfares, increase of tourism, more income. This is the first initiative of us as ICAO to promote air traffic. Making and raising awareness in the authorities and stakeholders of the air industry. This is a fundamental part of the markets in that sense. This event will be focused on the analysis of the impacts of studies of the regulatory framework on the impact of air services, also policies of liberalization, also economic benefits, and also the knowledge of different methodologies and techniques in these studies. We will show you the steps to make any other studies that will be needed in any state. All the activities and the work here in the ICAO is declared and open to increase the sustainability and to promote the increase of air traffic, especially for the period 2020-2035. I will give the word to Melvin Citroen, the General Director of this organization. Good morning. Thank you, Diego. Welcome you all. I would like to start thanking you, thanking our peers in SAM office with all these initiatives that we jointly conduct and everything we do for the air industry and the stakeholders like IDB, the Inter-American Bank. It has been a very important ally, and the studies that have been conducted are very, very useful to expose the reality of what aviation means for the developing countries. These studies, and I will give you an example, when I go to a small island and I talk about the impact of aviation in our region, the impact is of an industry of more than $106 billion, creating many jobs. And they look at me in a very strange way. They think it doesn't have to do anything to do with us. We are very small. We have 2 or 3 million inhabitants, and they don't see these benefits as part of these studies of the Inter-American Development Bank. Help us have all the data, all the information that shows that even being small countries, the impact of aviation in the sustainable economy of each of the countries has to be and is a fundamental and key factor for the development of the countries. For me, it is very important all these studies, because they give us information showing the benefit of aviation. They show also which are the actions that are taken to get all the benefits. So I'm really thankful with the bank for being our partners and also for promoting well-being and the growth of aviation in our region, in our countries. If you are listening and there is a country interested in some studies, please focus on this. These studies are very important. These studies will help convince many ministers, many delegations. I have presented this in different congresses, in different meetings, and they have a great impact. For all those who do not understand and do not recognize the importance of aviation, now have a reference framework for it. This is very important. Everything that we are going to say here is very important. Our region has connectivity problems, especially in the Caribbean area. I traveled from Miami to the Caribbean, and the airfare was 755 US dollars. And a trip to Dubai was 225. 725. It means that for 25 bucks more, I would cross half of the world. And that is because we do not understand that we have to improve many areas to make that these airlines that want to be part of the progress, that want to have that connectivity, also can have benefits, because nobody is going to open an airline to fail. Liberalization is very important. In this area, today, it's not feasible for an airline to go from A to D. It has to go A to B to C and then to D. We gotta have an harmonization of policies. And if there is not a harmonization, we will continue to face this challenge. So everything that will be said today is very important. I wish us success. I wish everybody understands and everybody will see the different mechanisms that will help us get to the point we want. Thank you, Flavio. Thank you, Reynaldo. Thank you for everything. Thank you and welcome to you all. Thank you very much for your initial words. Now from Sam, Reynaldo Faravanti, I will give the floor to Flavio. Thank you, Diego. Welcome, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here in this event with Dr. Citron, our brothers from North America, Central America, with Reynaldo Fioravanti. You have been partners for very important initiatives. Also, you have been important in talks with authorities. Thank you very much. This is an incredible opportunity to have this event, to be jointly meeting here. This proves that the vision that we showed in Brazil was is not something that just remained in words. It's a joint and constant effort. This is something helpful for aviation in a sustainable way, and this has to be important for all member states. I would like to reinforce the words that Melvin expressed. Both regional offices have closely worked with the bank, and the efforts for this event, it is a proof that things are working nicely in order to build an overall view from the beginning to end of the process. It is a long-term effort for the sustainable development of aviation. In the Americas and Latin America region, we have seen a very important improvement, increase and recovery after COVID pandemics. We have overcome the challenge for 2019. However, there is a question regarding the sustainability of this growth. We know that there are instruments and elements essential for the development of the sector, regardless of the recovery of this moment. However, the infrastructure that we have that is so trustable, it has to be there to be trusted and to meet the demands. Also, the regulators' efforts are very important. These are elements that take long to be implemented and be ready. At the same time, we know that there's the need to create an environment where investors and the air industry can develop. In order for this environment to be favorable, it is essential to have transparent public policies motivated by the fact that we need a mid and long-term policy. In this sense, regulators and their capacity to develop regulations, establish studies, impact studies, viability or feasibility policies, all of that is very important. And those concepts have to be vis-a-vis a technical development of aviation. So today, we are going to talk about one of these important aspects of the regulatory practices. It's also a long-term thing at ICAO, where we want to align the guidelines, the practices, so that everything is sustainable in time. It has to be studied in an ongoing manner in the benefit of the market, attracting investment, increasing service providers, inclusion. All that is a very nice theory. We don't need to talk about it. But hearing here good practices, successes, frustrations, difficulties in the way is very important. So for me, it is very important to have here several presenters that will have this pragmatic vision of their experiences on how they recorded these benefits, how they implemented different growth sustainable models for aviation within their states. Good practices are always together with information and data. But we cannot forget the building blocks. We're talking about sovereignty, assurance, no discrimination in the opportunities that are given to operators, the interdependence of air institutions and cooperations in all the activities. We have been working very hard in the region, in both regions in that sense. And we expect some discussions on multilateral agreements to promote more those services and to ensure that those states that have that open vision can implement it in a very rapid and efficient way. I would like to conclude my words inviting the member states to take into consideration that during Assembly 41, there will be the opportunity to sign some agreements and international protocols that could be very useful. So please take into consideration that we have the YASTA, and please try to abide to it. Montreal Agreement, El Ciudad del Cabo Agreement, and all those are opportunities that can give visibility to the actions and measures taken by the states. So please take into consideration the opportunity in Assembly 41, and if not there, in the future times, because this will ensure that these public policies are beneficial for the air traffic among the states. I would also like to tell you that the new negotiation event of air navigation services will take place in Abuja, Nigeria, from December 5 to 9. I invite you and I urge you to be part of this important event, to see the negotiations, the world negotiations. To conclude, I would like to thank Diego, Dora, Mariela, Sam, Julio, Nat, Antonan, así, all the members of the Inter-American Bank. And I hope we can continue working together to give a good example, to be a role model as this organization was. It was essential what we did with cargo transportation, and all the negotiation and all the talks were very well received. Thank you and welcome to this event. Thank you, Fabio. Now the transportation leader, I will ask Reynaldo to take the floor. Good morning, Diego, Fabio, Melvin. Can you hear me well? I would like to say hello to all the participants, all the states, ICAO members, and all my peers. It is a pleasure to be here. Everything that Melvin and Fabio have said is true in terms of the partnership that we have developed with ICAO. I would like to congratulate Fabio and Melvin for their leadership. I think the leadership is going through a very important moment in the region, and also with the Secretary General that knows the region very well because he comes from this region. We have a leadership that will make the difference in the next year. So I congratulate you. And from the Inter-American Bank, I would like to say, and I don't want to talk a lot because we have a presentation, but all the work that we've been doing as a development bank, we are centering on funding, but also on public policies. We work a lot with the states that are the customers, everything that is needed for the implementation of public policies. And we want them to be consistent in this context. Some years ago, we started to work in those studies on the impact of air liberalization. And this is in line with the fact that we always look for evidence to implement policies. As Fabio said, this is fundamental, to have evidence, to have information of the results. On top of practical experience, that is what we can see here. So that for us as a development bank is key, because we know that we have limited resources, priorities have to be very well defined, and we are looking to support solid policies. And here we have a very good example in the air sector regarding air liberalization. Last but not least, and Diego will tell you more about this, we have several studies that we conducted with Brazil, with Dominican Republic, also another study with Bahamas that is not present here, but we can bring it in another time. These are real examples. We have seen very important impacts, and also for the efforts of the bank. So I appreciate your participation. I congratulate ICAO, and I hope that we can offer a useful picture for your public policies. Thank you, Reynaldo. Thank you, Melvin, Fabio, for your opening words. There are very important contributions for the opening of the market with the policies now in the region. To start, we will have two initial presentations, one of the ICAO, another one of the bank. I invite the Director of Analysis to present the liberalization policies in ICAO. Josiah will talk about the analysis of the information, forecast, air connectivity, and also economical studies.
Thank you very much, Ronaldo. So I'm Sai Narayan. I work for the International Civil Aviation Organization, the Air Transport Bureau, as the Chief of Aviation Data and Analysis. Thank you for inviting me for this important meeting. So as was mentioned by the regional director and by the speakers before me, the importance of liberalization cannot be overemphasized. So liberalization is a key for the states to reap the socio-economic benefits that comes along with it. So we have put together a presentation which basically talks a bit on what traditionally ICAO has been doing in the area of liberalization for a couple of decades, and also showing the shifts which is happening in terms of actually operationalizing or showing the states as to how liberalization can actually benefit them economically. So that's a little bit of shift that has happened over the last 4 or 5 years. It started just before COVID, and that started through the study which we did along with the regional office and the Inter-American Development Bank for Dominican Republic, and some other ongoing work which has been blessed by the Assembly and by the states. And we'll discuss that briefly. So Julio, can we go to the next slide? So this, many of you might have seen multiple amount of times. These are basically what ICAO has been doing in the area of liberalization for, as I said, decades. They take the form of basically policy guideline documents as to how to implement liberalization or the impact of taxation, air transport policies, how to develop model agreements. So these documents have been there for many years, and the ATRP and the states work together to keep these documents aligned with ongoing requirements. So this is basically the traditional work which has been done by our bureau in the area of liberalization. And any guidance or any facilitation from our side as to interpret these policy guidelines, the economic development staff who are specialized in this are always available at the disposal of states. Next slide, please. The other one, which sort of goes along with this, is the ICAO's policy on charges for airport and air navigation services, and as well as the airport economics manual. Though it is cannot be directly considered as liberalization, it basically shows on what are the guidelines or the policies which can be adopted by member states, so as to ensure that the charging is done in an open and transparent manner, which in turn impacts your competitiveness, and which is in that way connected to liberalization. So again, a lot of work has been done by our bureau and my area, especially in this particular field, because we consider this as one of the most important and critical elements as far as competitiveness is concerned. So we have developed a lot of applications using the Doc 1700, which is basically a compendium of all the charges which are filed with us by member states, both airport charges and air navigation charges. And in essence, you can see the impact of charges and benchmark your charges with the charges which are happening in your nearby region, in your region or your neighboring regions, as well as the other regions in the world. So, for example, you can see a particular flight, right, going from point A to point B, and see what are the charges which are currently being levied. And you can look at a comparable flight in a nearby state or a nearby region and see how they are evolving their charges. And by just putting that charges comparison along with the traffic comparison, you will get a very good idea as to how important these charges are in attracting or not attracting traffic. So if you need any help in this, you can kind of contact my staff, Antonin, or just drop an email at ecd@ico.int, and we'll be very happy to share this application to the states and to this particular region in particular. Next slide, please. So, as you might be knowing, in the 16-member meeting of the Air Transport Regulation Panel, certain things were, basically, considered by the states, and this is ongoing work. Working papers have been put up on these areas in the assembly. This relates to basically continuing the work on developing a draft convention on ownership and control. And the other thing which is basically work is ongoing is to examine the need for a model agreement as far as liberalization of air cargo is concerned, and of course on the evolving areas of unmanned aircrafts. Next slide, please. So as I said, like some of the work which you already saw in the preceding slides are things which we have been doing for some time now. But two things which stand out now, which we have started recently, and which is getting a lot of traction from the member states. Yes, please. Yeah, there is an ongoing work which I think there was a slide before this, before the upcoming events, please. Yeah, this one is the work on the Aviation Competitiveness Index. There's a lot of interest in this particular activity from the states. What we have done is we have basically defined what aviation competitiveness is. And there will be a series of working group meetings. This has already been approved by the states and by the assembly. We have a very good working group which has got quite a bit of representation from this particular region, which will be now starting to work in arriving at metrics related to competitiveness, and then sorting and arranging the states in the order of their competitiveness. And needless to say, liberalization is going to be one of the key parameters or metric which will affect the scores of the states in this particular aviation competitiveness. So this we hope to have a working group meeting in Lima office later this year, and this is an activity which has got a lot of interest worldwide from different states across all regions. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned by the regional director, we have an ICANN event, which is scheduled to be held in December between 5th to 9th, and it's hosted by the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority. Next slide. So as was mentioned by the regional director, our bureau and my area in particular worked a lot with the regional office as well as with the Inter-American Development Bank and with some key consultants from Brazil to basically make this happen. So in essence, next slide, please. This one basically talks about the impact of liberalization and reforms in the Dominican Republic. It focuses on how open skies or focused bilaterals improved the traffic and how it translated into socioeconomic benefits. And as was mentioned by Mr. Mervin, this is being a really a key driver in states understanding how these things are directly impacting their economies and how it could be a key multiplier in increasing the social and economic benefits which the states can get from adopting liberalized policies as far as civil aviation is concerned. And the study also shows how this has to work in a broader context of other policies, like, for example, which will have also impacts on policies relating to tourism, on development of infrastructure, on financing of infrastructure. So liberalization is one of the key force multipliers, which will actually see a host of benefits across other domains, especially those related to tourism as well as with infrastructure development. And if anyone is interested, to know more about this study, I know we have a good representation from IIDB. But if you want to know more about the modeling or the data which was used behind it, and then again, kindly feel free to contact us and we'll be more than happy to assist you. Next slide, please. So again, it's important the states understand that any decisions they take on liberalization has a direct bearing on their achieving the sustainable development goals. And ICAO is one of the, basically custodial agency as far as the transport related goals is concerned. And you can see a direct correlation between liberalization and them achieving this particular sustainable development goal, 9.1. And this is also being made available by us to the United Nations and published by the UN in their websites. We'll be happy to share the links to that, and which again is very keenly watched by the member states, especially by our financial Ministry of Finance, as well as other related ministries, to see how good the state is in achieving this sustainable development goal. So liberalization is basically a key component on states achieving their sustainable development goal as far as SDG 9.1 is concerned, and as far as the broader social economic benefits it brings to the states. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, basically the case study, which will be discussed in more detail after this, talks about how you have a modernized framework, a liberalized framework, and how application of various ICAO's policies, like I mentioned, the Doc 9082. Next slide. Will basically give an impetus in driving the traffic and thereby driving the economic benefits to the states. So the objectives of this study is basically to use rigorous econometric models. And as I said, we basically used worked with the Inter-American Development Bank and with the regional office. And there was a lot of work which went into developing this study, which was released and signed off by our SecGen at that time and released to the member states. And we plan to take this again, since COVID is now coming, we are able to travel more and we are able to take it to other states. We want to highlight this also in all our own seminars and workshops going forward. Next slide. So just very quickly, the study actually demonstrated that a modernized institutional framework coupled with liberalization for Dominican Republic achieved significant increase in the GDP per capita, as you can see from the slide. It obviously improved the GDP substantively. And more importantly, it also saw the tourism spending increase by around $1 billion between 2006 to 2012. So next slide. This slide is obviously shows what happened before the reform period and after the reform period. As you see, the slope of the curve is basically self-explanatory. And this is in essence what we plan to highlight in all our future events, showing the states how basically a liberalization will help them in improving traffic and bringing about economic benefits. Last slide, I think. So we will be holding seminars and workshops across regions. We will be, as I said, taking this and incentivizing states to conduct similar studies with the cooperation of the regional banks and multilateral banks. And we will also carry on the work related to competitiveness index. And the other thing which we're doing again, which we have got a lot of important members from the United Nations, is the satellite account. So in essence, when we go to the states and say that, okay, you're liberalizing and you will get this much economic benefits, then the Ministry of Finance is very important for them to understand that we are following the the UN framework of measuring the impact of any sector in their economies. And this is what the UN calls as the satellite account or the system of national accounts. So very soon ICAO will be finalizing the document. We went through a statistics division where the final touches were put to conclude the work on this aviation satellite account document. In essence, that's a document which can be it's a standardized document approved by the United Nations System of National Accounts members, which will tell the states that this way, if you just fill up this template, then you can actually quantify the economic contribution from civil aviation to your economies. And this too will be disseminated through seminars and workshops. And therefore, it will be easier for us to highlight the contribution of liberalization and put it to a standardized economic framework and show the economic benefits. So these two will be a focus activities going forward. Next slide. Thank you very much for this. And if there are any questions, we'll be more than happy to take it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sai. I really appreciate for your presentation regarding the liberalization policies in the field of air transport and all the insights, information that you brought to enhance connectivity here in our region, in the study case on Dominican Republic as well. Thank you very much. Bueno, ahora por parte de BID, llamo nuevamente al señor Reinaldo.
Okay, once again, we are going to give the floor to Mr. Reinaldo Fioravanti for his next presentation. Go ahead, Reinaldo, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Diego. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Yeah? Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can. Go ahead, please. Okay. I am going to be brief, as a matter of fact, because I am going to provide you vision, strategy, and results with regard to the air transportation. And obviously, I am going to provide you with some studies, which we call policy implementation evidences and how they match in this vision. We recognize that the sector has some key challenges in the region. These numbers are not really updated, but the three challenges are still present. For instance, restricted air commercial policies, which is one of our main challenges. In this seminar, it's one of the items that we are going to go through. The second one, we have had some progress, but there are still some challenges in the region as how the states can open the markets even more. There have been some aspects, technical, political, and commercial aspects, but we have seen that this is an important agenda where we can support the state. The second pillar, or the second challenge, sorry, the second challenge is the infrastructure, of course. And as you know, there is a big infrastructure gap to close, and hopefully in the future, the states, they are they are going to carry on working on this, especially in well, the demand is increasing as we expect. Obviously, here, most of the investment comes from the private sector, such as concessions and licensees that have had a very great evolution in the region. But we see that this is a challenge to follow this pace of investment. And of course, obviously, the ICAO has a lot of share, which are the security standards and safety standards by following the ICAO standards. We also had some progress, and I emphasize this in the effort by the ICAO, who has actively participating with the states in this challenge. But there is still an agenda to work on. So these are the challenges that we may say today are leading the work of the IDB in air transportation. And to reply, to give response to these challenges, we have a strategy that is published in the IDB webpage. I invite you to download the document. We also can share the document as well later on, Diego. And this is built on these pillars and response to these three challenges. First of all, we need to support and promote the national air integration and the regional one in Latin America and the Caribbean. As a bank, we need to promote regional integration that obviously includes other commerce, trade, logistics, and transportation implications. But within the air transportation, it is a very important pillar in our strategy to support and promote the quality infrastructure, obviously with public and private investment and supported by the bank. And obviously we need to promote the access to safe air services that are feasible and sustainable. We will have also the institution support. Our structure is that without institutions or the governance or the framework, an efficient one and a transparent one, we are not going to be able to achieve these pillars. We have been working a lot in institutional reforms with the state. And the last pillar, which is not is the last but not least important, we have found lots of evidence, and this is going to increase. We are being focused and centered in the environmental topics. We, as the bank, for instance, as of next year, all of our operations should be aligned to the Paris Agreement and the commitments of each established by each state. So this dimension in air transportation has been growing, and we see that this is a trend. So therefore, this is the compass or the framework that we have been working on within this sector. We have been working in different countries virtually in most of the country, in the regional countries. They have been increasing over the last years. And these, here we can see some of the results of the dimension. To give you an idea, we have been working in over 13 countries with regard to domestic and aviation policies. These reforms and amendments, including institutional, regulatory, and technical aspects. In 19 countries where we, over these 8 years, we have been working in more specific safety topics by supporting the certification processes or through specific implementations. I do emphasize that here, one of the work that we performed in Brazil that was very related to these air services, this was the first study that we carried out in this aspect, and we can share this study as well. and we are going to share it today as well. And another work that we performed in Colombia for some essential air services that are basically connectivity to remote regions. And finally, I would like to highlight that we are launching a new edition, a new version of an online course to train with regard to regulation and management of the airports. We had over 500 participants and were certified in this course. We are launching the second edition of this course. It will be in October or November. We are inviting all the states to participate. We have a lot of feedback from the ICAO and other partners, and we see how a course that can help in this effort of training that the areas are doing. This is a free of charge course, online course, available to all the states. In terms of investment, we see that here we have a very important figure, 1.8 million investment. This is quite important. And we have the private and the public sector. We work in both dimensions. And finally, as I said in the beginning, the objective of today's seminar is that we put a lot of effort to generate evidences for the implementation of public policies in all the aspects, in all the sectors and that we are going to see today, which is the study that was made together with Brazil and Dominican Republic. And we also have other projects that are going in the same line. So our idea is to carry out working with the states by identifying where do we need this type of effort and expanding this work. So I am going to stop here, Diego. Shall we do the Q&A session or later on? Diego says we can, I think we can wait a bit more. We will have a Q&A space. We will have a Q&A section. I think near to the end, we are going to have this session, okay? The Q&A. Thank you so much. Well, once the presentation, the general presentations have been done by the ICAO, BD, and IDB, sorry, we would like to introduce you to the benefits of the studies about air transport liberalizations that is going to rely on the participation of Brazil, the ENAC, and the Dominican Republic representing the International Institute of Civil Aviation. Therefore, to start with, Mr. Rafael Faria, Superintendent of Coupling of Air Services of AMAC Brazil, is going to present his study performed in a country, the regulatory analysis of air services. Thank you so much, Rafael. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for your time and being here. Go ahead, please. Yes, can you hear me okay? Yes, we can, loud and clear. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Diego. First of all, I would like to say hello to my colleagues of the Authority of the Civil Aviation, the father, Abana, Diego, Melvin, Alavasi, from also, hello, Reynaldo, on behalf of the BD. I have to thank the ICAO and the IDB for promoting and encouraging these type of events that has as a purpose to provide the benefits of promoting the liberalization of the market in all Latin America, and also the sensitivity of the civil aviation authorities with regard to the fundamental role of the markets and the incursion of the market. So we have had a very rich experience here in Brazil, and I am going to share our achievements. I do thank the opportunity for participating in this forum, and also to the states that have achieved these to the moment. I am going to share my screen with the presentation.
Bien, todos consiguen.
Can you see my screen? Yeah, good.
Bien, yo para contextualizar presentaré
Well,
una línea de
to bring you up to speed, I created a timeline of some of the important aspects to Brazil. In 2005, there was the creation of the ANAC, now responsible for the negotiation of the air services agreements and the negotiations according to the Civil Aviation Council, CONAC, and the Civil Aviation Domestic Policy, the PNAC, which was the creation of the agency. In 2007, we started the liberalization of the capacity to our agreements for South America. And we had some guidelines of removal of restrictions such as price freedom to all the traded tickets in Brazil and Latin America. And NANAC started with the negotiations of open skies in all the agreements. And another milestone for us was the possibility in 2019 of possibility of negotiations of air traffic rights of the seventh freedom for the exclusive cargo operations. And also, this is another important aspect, is unlimited the participation of foreign investment in domestic companies. So we have no limitations for investment with regard to foreign principle. Okay. The main agreements, clauses and provisions of the ASAs, we have the designation of companies multiple. There are no one single company appointed by our agreement. And in terms of rates, there is a freedom of prices. We always look for a open route framework. We also have a mandate of sixth freedom and seven freedom of cargo. And with regard to property, we have established a free control and also a free determination with regard to the foreign investment that can be bilateral or the tax companies. So as we can see, there is a policy of guideline principles, which is quite liberal in order to provide our air services. Which are the benefits that we had up to this point? We had the liberalization through this policy. In this slide, we can see an evolution of all our agreements signed in Brazil. In 2007, when we started with the liberalization of the economic liberalization and the concept of liberalization and the agreements, we had an exponential growth with more than 50% of growth in signed agreements. And most of the agreements were executed with Brazil. Nowadays, the characteristics are extremely liberal. And we have been working continuously with our teams in order to develop more, and we work more with other teams because we are implementing flexible and reliable measures. In Brazil, we rely on 115 air services agreements with 9 countries. We have signed bilateral agreements, and 71 countries have a property clause allowing foreign investment in domestic airlines. And 72 free determination, capacity determination agreements, and 69 agreements with open skies. So in summary, we have been making progress. We have seen that the evolution of air traffic has been enormous, both domestic and abroad. In Brazil, we have data with the comparison of the growth and domestic passengers traffic and million packs of passengers transported every year. We are not considering the pandemic because there we have a drop in that period. We also had an increase, a growth in production, very consistent one with regard to international passengers. It was exponential, and hopefully we can see this in all the states and in all the nations, and they can move with more freedom. Well, as Reynaldo said, in 2014, we performed a study together with the IDB, the Inter-American Bank of Development. We had a participation of 92 countries during 15 years from 2000 to 2014 with different variables. We had the main point, the passenger was our main point. We also had the population intervention, the government, we had GDP per capita, the distance. We consider lots of metrics and other effects, other fixed effects from other countries. We also had, well, we carried out this study, and the most relevant results were, and I would like to highlight that the liberalization affected positively the passenger transportation with solid and robust results over the years. There was also spotted a direct correlation in the trade, and it has been positive because for each 1% generated, there is a growth of 0.22% of passengers. Another correlation, which is quite relevant, is the GDP. This correlation here, when we have a 1% growth, it generates 2.5% growth for passengers. This is quite relevant correlation. Well, as the conclusion of this study, well, our opinion was quite interesting, but we need to update this study because we have a big difference of our agreements up to this point. But the conclusion that we have with regard to liberalization was quite important for the recent growth of air traffic, the international air traffic in Brazil, and the benefits of the liberalization could be bigger for this study, and this can be really good for rate reduction and connectivity, and also for the defects that all the process, all the concession process of airports of Sintasov that was started in 2012 in Brazil.
Con la abertura de la sétima liberdade de carga que este estudio não contemplou à época. Pero yo puedo mostrar también la evolución del tráfico aéreo internacional.
I can also show how the international air traffic has evolved. And as you can see here in the table, I have information that is clearer from 2008 to 2018. 19, there's a constant growth in the national and international airlines in Brazil. And we have here a comparison from the year 2008 to 2019. We can show a consistent benefit for all the different air companies operating in Brazil, not only Brazilian companies, but all the companies operating in Brazil. And well, I conclude with this to tell you which are the benefits that we have reached. And we not only focused on Brazilian companies, but also other companies that operate in our country. And both type of companies have been benefited. It is important to show with the member states. This is a brief presentation, but I think that the richness lies on the question and answer section. And I'm available to you for any question that you have on the development of air traffic evolution. Diego, I am available for any question you have, but on my end, that would be all as for a presentation. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you for this valuable information, for presenting all the benefits for Brazil, all the benefits that all kinds of airlines have had in Brazil. I remind you that all the presentations will be available in the ICAO web page, and we will make an email address available for you to make any question. Now we'll talk about the air transportation case study from Dominican Republic, and Eduardo Cafe will also be here available for you. For you too, welcome. Good morning. I don't know if you want to start or do you want me to start? Please, Bernarda, start. You start. Well, before anything, I would like to thank the ICAO, regional offices of the ICAO, the North American, Central American, and Caribbean areas, and also the South America region, General Secretary of ICAO, and everybody who works in those offices. You are really having a very admirable job. You have an authentic leadership in the region. I would like to thank the Inter-American Development Bank for all the cooperation and the development of this case study, where in a very professional way, they detailed all the progress made in civil aviation, not only regarding the liberalization of air traffic, but also in the regulatory framework of the country. And in this case, opposite to other cases in the country, we had to work with a liberalized air policy. We also had to work to have very high standards of operation in operational matters. And based on the visits from the United States, it was determined that some corporators were not operating in a safe way, and the intervention of the authority was a little bit weak. So the ICAO in 2003 conducted an audit, and the outcome was that the regulatory framework of the Dominican Republic, which was old, needed some adjustments. And obviously, this regulatory framework had to do with Act 505/69 that had not been modernized or opened or updated. The regulatory framework of Dominican Republic did not allow an efficient surveillance. And among the weaknesses of Act 505 was the inability of the director to change rules, regulatory statements and civil air ordinance. There were no mechanisms that could allow the inspectors to go anywhere at any moment where aircraft facilities or air staff were. The amounts of sanctions were not enough. The authority of the general director to impose emergency measures when safety was in danger was very low. And the general director, didn't have the authority that was needed in any emergency case. So he was not in the position to issue an order. And one of the essential limitations that Act 505 had was that it was an organization dependent on the executive power of the government. So we depended on the central government. And we had a monthly allocation of funds. And when those funds were finished, we had to postpone or stop training, surveillance activities, or any other service dependent from the air authorities. So together with that veto and the impossibility of the country to have an adequate legislation, the country itself decided in 2006 to update or modernize act. This act allowed the authorities to have independence regarding funds. And what does this fund autonomy mean? It allows IDAC and other institutions depending on the air system to train the staff to have air navigation efficient and modern services, maintenance services, training services that can take place in modern facilities. If you've gone to Dominican Republic, you might have seen that we have very modern facilities now. There are also benefits like a standardization and improvement of salaries. And now we have financial autonomy. With the change of governments, we have been interrogated regarding our funding system, but the air authority has been able to respond and answer all these questions and inquiries. And we really have had an improvement, not only the law itself or the Act 491/06, but the fact that the authority has become strong has been very important. Also, the separation of the different works, efforts, and functions between IDAC and JAC. We don't have any conflict of interests now. If there is an agency that is suspended because they do not comply with the law, they can come before the JAC or the IDAC because they have different functions. Now, the IDAC is in charge of certifications regarding safety. Talking about other benefits, there's an active participation regarding, for example, CO2 emissions. We are part of a program as volunteers. Another benefit is the authority of the general director. Making the different rules of Dominican Republic to be updated. We do not depend on the executive or legislative power. We have autonomy to update it through a resolution, and the new rules can be adopted based on the amendments made to the different technical annexes. Regarding safety, in 2011, the Act 188/11 was implemented. And the agency in charge is Civil Aviation and Airport Safety.
Flexibilizar la inversión extranjera.
Act 2918 was amended in its Article 119. Here we can see in this table how, based on the audit conducted in the year 2009 by ICAO, this organization verified the compliance, the standards of safety in the Dominican Republic. In 2017, another audit was conducted to determine the compliance of other elements that had been pending. They didn't have the level they needed. and compliance was 90.7%. Regarding regulation and legislations, the structure and the modernization has been ongoing. All the different elements have been complied with regarding the ICAO. In this case, we've talked about regulations because this impact in the compliance of all the juridical elements. Regarding organization, we have a modern system for the inclusion of administrative sanctions and also an updating of sanction development, notice letter, a warning letter emission. And that would be all on my side. And now I will give the floor to Paola Prat so that she can speak regarding open skies, and I leave the doors of my office open to any question. Thank you, Doña Bernarda, and thank you to the ICAO and the Inter-American Bank. Following everything that Dr. Bernarda said, I will talk about the implementation of an open sky policy. We are based on the issues of the law in 2006, but it was not until 2010 that the Dominican Republic authorized this policy. It has to do with the number of seats, the capacity, the cargo, the free air fees setting, share code agreements, non-regular or charter flights, and also traffic rights, because it allows up to air freedom at a 6th level and a 7th level. Up to 2007, our country had signed 19 agreements. There was an amendment, and thanks to it, our country started making negotiations regarding air services. And up to this date, we have 70 bilateral agreements. Some of them had to do with air freedom. You can read here how they are divided. There was a memorandum of understanding with ICAO, and it was signed, and it promotes the 7th air freedom. In 2019, the Dominican Republic, based on everything I said, received an award named Conectividad Global Sobresaliente, Outstanding Global Connectivity. And it is because of our open sky policy. One of the amendments in the legislation and in this opening and liberalization of traffic rights, we had an increase in our foreign air operators operation. We have an increase of 59, giving us a total of 255 authorized routes. We have 16 economic authorization certificates, and now we have some regulated airs, and it represents 73 authorized routes. If we talk about the results and the amendments to our legislation, everything that has happened in passenger movement, we can see that from 2005, when the flexibilization process started, until the year before the pandemic, there was an increase. And I would also like to highlight how the República Dominicana is totally recovered after the results of the pandemic. You can see here how during 2020 and 2021, there was an increase in passenger movements. Also, I would like to say that in 2021, 48 routes were authorized, and this year, 32 more routes. Forecasts indicate that our country is forecasting to transport more than 15 million passengers. So we are expecting a good end of the year in spite of the pandemic, and that would be all on my side. Thank you. Understanding República Dominicana's case, the ICAO and the bank decided to make a study in order to determine the reason or the relation there was between the current situation and the need for a change. So it was important to have a rigorous or stringent evaluation for the impacts. In the past, the studies were not very strict. So now we used an econometric model to measure the impact of the policies in 3 variables: the gross domestic product per capita in the country, the concentration of the market, and the third one in the number of passengers that travel from the United States to the Dominican Republic. And why this last third party? Because with this rigorous econometric model, we need many information coming from several countries. And we needed as much disaggregated as possible to decentralize it. So here we can see how the tourists coming from the United States represent a large part of the income in República Dominicana. And that's why we decided to use this database. The model defines a control group that simulates the case of the country if the country would have not established or implement those reforms. And the results represent the direct causes of the political reforms of the air sector in Dominican Republic in the selected variables. So making all these measurements, we go from the evaluation of the past situation with the present situation. To explain very, very rapidly how this analysis is made, as you can see in the upper graph, we have the treatment group in the Dominican Republic and the control group, that is the group of countries used in order to make this comparison. Countries that are similar to Dominican Republic. And you can see the gap in the gross domestic product. And you can see that it is very similar up to 26. And after that year, after the regulations were implemented, the gap grew. So this indicates that the Dominican Republic improved and improved vis-a-vis the situation of similar countries. In the lower chart, you can see the great difference from 2006 on. In this study, we can see that between 2006 and 2012, the total net effect is a growth of $7.1 billion for the period, representing a 30% of the growth in the country. So the total net effect is 7.1 billion. And this other variable is the impact of the reforms in the air sector. And the conclusion is that from 2006 and on, there has been a decentralization due to the increase of competition and the reduction of the most important national airlines. So these reforms have brought more airlines to the Dominican market, and this means a reduction in airfares. And you can see here how, for example, American Airlines have decreased and others have increased. So having a decentralized market has benefited República Dominicana. There's also a change in the flow of passengers from the United States to Dominican Republic. Here, I use this table to illustrate, and I know it cannot tell you, a lot of you are not familiarized with it, but I can tell you that all the new measurements that were implemented helped increase the flow of passengers from the States to Dominican Republic from 23 to 27%, representing also a great increase in money. This is a positive impact of the reforms, impact in the economy of the Dominican Republic. Now, Bernarda and Paolo can talk about the effect of the recommendations given to República Dominicana and the progresses made. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Based on the growth of air operations in the market, we have noticed the interest of other foreign airlines of non-traditional markets to fly to our country. For example, New York and Miami routes. There are many airlines that have shown their interest in the Dominican Republic market. And I will explain the shared code policy. And since now it is permitted, depending on the country who we are signing up agreements,
guaranteed by the ICAO has increased the interest in the domestic market. Also, our airlines have grown. And in that case, we have had 6 domestic airlines under the 121 have diversified the market, and each of them are providing services in non-traditional markets. And with regard to some airlines, I am not going to mention anyone, but because they get jealous, but that they are promoting connectivity in the Caribbean. And certainly this has been the point, the connectivity in the Caribbean. Well, that is with regard to go to a very near destination, or maybe Aruba or any of the destinations, we need to go to a certain point and then come back. And within this increase that we have had with this new law that has been ongoing for 15 years, the capacity was increased, and also the interest of many and the learning of many aeronautical matters. And through the law, well, the law brought benefits and the aeronautical authority to rely on a school that is the Aeronautical Sciences Academy, which is considered as an excellency institution by the ICAO. And this institution is certified for higher studies, and together with universities, they have made signed agreements such as the Singapore Academy to broadcast everything that is about the aeronautical learning. So that through that course, we have been training the staffs and the different people with regard to air traffic, safety, security, with regard to the airport. And with regard to general aviation, it has been growing a lot through the encouragement of aeronautical fairs, where the aeronautical authority has participated and has promoted these fairs, and these fairs to be performed in the country. We have also had many requests about aeronautical workshops, and we have had 145 so far. Some of them have been held online, and there is also interest in everything with regard to the aeronautical learning. It has been growing. We have 2 universities besides the Aeronautical Science Academy. 2 universities are permanently offering an academic offer with regard to aeronautical learning and teaching. When we performed this case study in the Dominican Republic, one of the recommendations that brought this case was to promote the learning and the knowledge through universities. And afterwards, after this case study, we promoted the collaboration together with universities. Okay, we have been made progress, and there's still a long way to go. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the ICAO and all the agencies from the North, Center, and South America. Thank you for your trust, because you have allowed us to participate in this case study, and it's to expose everything that has been on our experience. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bernarda, says Diego. Thank you to Oda, Eduardo, for presenting this study, which is quite important, not only to Dominican Republic, but also to the entire Latin American region and the Caribbean, for us to be interconnected. Well, by doing the follow-up to this session, we are going to have a space for questions and answers. I think Venezuela has a question. It's hand raised. Okay. Would you please go ahead? Do you want to ask your question right now? No, I don't think so. Daniela, are you going to ask your question right now? No, apparently not. Okay, is there anybody who would like to ask the speakers anything? Now this is an open space for question and answers. I think there is a question, says Eduardo. Yeah, I think Juan raised his hand. Juan Camilo from Alta. Go ahead, please. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I think this type of space is promoted by the ICAO and SAM and the IDB. It's helping to enhance the regional policies. And one question with regard to the open skies policy. Well, let's say that on the airline side is that when you implement these open skies policies, some other operators in other countries are subsidized because the operator is from another country and they won't be in the same court, you know. So have these studies seen an impact with regard to the open skies onto a local operator with regard to another one that is not subsidized? Thank you, Juan. Brazil, Dominican Republic, Brazil is going to answer the question. Thank you so much, says Rafael. Thank you, Juan, for your question. I think that we have this case in South America with companies that are subsidized by other countries. But I think the concurrence and the competitiveness of the air and private companies are more efficient. In general, they are more efficient than the ones that are subsidized by the government. So therefore, we don't have any differentiation here in Brazil of routes or quantity of movements from one company, whether they are subsidized or totally private. So we believe that there is no great difference with regard to the service providers, but we think that the competence, the competitors, and the companies, it are the main principle to us. So we believe in competitors, in competitiveness, whether it is with private or public companies. So we don't have any differentiation here in Brazil. Thank you, Rafael, says Diego. Dominican Republic, do you want to make a comment? Bernarda says, well, it's a bit difficult, this question, because precisely according to the ICAO principle, we cannot have a differentiated rate for anyone, or the utilization cannot be differentiated. However, in the last time we have been working with stimulation, and it has been very positive. We are stimulating the regional markets because this is a big line. And some of them are not interested in marketing, and there they have found a niche, a business niche with the regional companies when it's about certain agreements on open skies. So they are opposed sometimes, but we are trying to convince them, because there are certain businesses that haven't, there are certain gaps, business gaps that haven't been filled. And we understand that over the last year, the sector has been growing, and they have been focused their business modality to the regional market. However, in the same vision, for instance, just like Brazil, we do not have any rate differentiation. Thank you so much, says Diego. There is a question for Brazil in the chat. It's in English.
I also wonder whether foreign airlines are allowed to provide PSOs in Brazil. Afet, pode contestarla?
Can you answer that question in English? In English or in Spanish?
In Brazil are working the market basis, airlines are free to choose which destination they're interested to without any obligation service. It's important to add that cabotage is not allowed in Brazil, only in a specific case to meet special needs and circumstances. So if I can understand the question, I interpretate that the public services obligations could be the market, the airline choosing from routes. That's correct.
Sí, gracias, Rafael.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rafael. Well, we have another question in the chat.
With regard to the liberalization of air transport, sign air service agreements, was this only the main cause of the growth in traffic, or was it also the investment in infrastructure and other policies? Please, Rafael.
Well, first of all, I have to say that the growth of the civil aviation sector depends on several actions here. Creating an enable environment is essential, and having liberal air service agreements go a long way in doing this. Another point is that we have an infrastructure capable of services and not being an operational restriction. From the experience we had, only the infrastructure does not create demand, but the lack of demand does not allow growth. And it's important to say that. So investment in infrastructure is essential to enable growth. And another point that we recommend is the creation of an agile environment to accommodate all the constant evolution of the civil aviation sector, and the interaction with other countries helps a lot in this growth. So I can say that we had to invest in infrastructure, but it's not generate demand, and we have to interact. We have to standardize all the procedures that we have in the whole region, the most of countries that we have. That's the tips that I can say.
Gracias, Rafael. Excelentes declaraciones. Hay otra mano levantada.
Thank you so much. We have another raised hand. Saeed Suleiman, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and
Yes.
clear.
First of all, I want to express my deep appreciation for this forum organized by our colleagues from NAC and the SAM region, and with support from the IDB and everyone who presented this morning. I think it was an excellent presentation. The benefits of liberalization and open up the market, it's well known. We have statistics and data. And I want to commend everybody who presented the facts to substantiate this position. I want to appeal to us, colleague, an area of concern in air services agreements that has been sort of an impediment to open up the market or liberalization is substantial ownership and effective control. It's in many agreements. Many countries are now moving away from substantial ownership to the principal place of business argument or case for designation. Presently, before the ATRP, we have been working very hard to pass this convention on liberalizing this area, the convention on foreign investment in airlines. I think we need to continue to push to have this convention passed by all states so that we can move a step further in removing one more barrier to liberalization. I know significant work has been done on that convention. but there's still some apprehension from states to move ahead with the convention. I would say, based on the stats and the data presented to us here today, it makes a clear case that let's remove the barrier on ownership. And many of us may be part of that ATRP meeting discussing these issues. So, colleagues, I appeal for us to take a deeper look at the convention. The draft is out there, and for us to work together to maybe remove that barrier also as we seek to grow the region, grow the market, promote all the benefits we've spoken about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Suleiman. Indeed, we have to move forward in this process of liberalization. We have a lot of to do, and for sure, the state are aware about what have to do to move forward. Thank you very much. Bueno, yo creo que hay más.
Well, there are more questions anyways to ask to the speakers. No, I don't think so. Okay, sorry. So now we can move on to session number 2 of our webinar. Well, thank you so much for your questions, for your comments, and thank you to the speakers of session 1. So let's move to session number 2. I do invite Mr. Reynaldo Fabrante to moderate the panel and how to go beyond liberalization in the Caribbean and Latin American region. This panel will have an open discussion among the participants with regard to the market and the leaders of this sector. Go ahead, Reynaldo, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Diego. Well, I am really glad to be the moderator of this luxurious panel, which are going to, well, I am going to introduce the panelists and how we have representatives from Latin America and the Caribbean regions. And because of that, I am going to do it in both, in English and in Spanish. Sorry, the translator, I do apologize to the translators because they are going to have a very hard work in this switch.
So I will switch to English to introduce the 2 participants from the Caribbean. We have Safia Reed. She's a national of Trinidad and Tobago and is an advisor within the Directorate for Trade and Sustainable Development at the Association of Caribbean States. Thank you, Safia, for your participation. If you can open your camera so we can.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I am unable to. I think the host might have to assist me with that.
That's fine. Thank you. I want to introduce also Pauline Earwood. She's a deputy program manager with the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, for transport. She's the deputy program manager for transportation. Welcome, Pauline. I'm glad to see you.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Quiero también presentar a Jaime Binder.
I also want to introduce Jaime Binder, who is Deputy Secretary of the CLAC, and Jaime has been also General Secretary of the Association of Aviation in Chile. Thank you so much for the invite, says Jaime. Also, Alfonso Reyes Hernandez, says Reynaldo, who is the new representative of the EASA, the European Aviation Safety Association for Latin America and the Caribbean. He has been, he has joined to the EASA recently. Alfonso, thank you so much for your participation. Alfonso says, thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation, Reynaldo. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to share our experience. Thank you so much, says Reynaldo. And Martin McKenna, who is Secretary General of the Aviation Committee Board in Chile. Thank you so much, says Martin. Thank you for the invitation to this forum. Thank you all.
Switching to English and starting with Safia, if you're fine, Safia.
Sure, no problem.
So thanks again for your participation. I want to start asking you about what you see a main limitation for the Caribbean countries right now to pursue this air transport liberalization that we're talking about. And also I know you're deeply involved in trade, in economic development. So how do you see this effort to enable more trade and development in the Caribbean? So I would just start with your initial thoughts.
Sure, no problem. I'm still unable to open my camera, but I will I will answer your questions. If the host can assist me with doing that, I'll appreciate it. But a very interesting question. And I think that in some of the earlier presentations, some of those initial challenges, some of those main challenges and limitations to air liberalization would have been clearly outlined. I think that a big one has to do with restrictive air policies, and which are derived in part from a fear of unfair competition for smaller local airlines in light of potential challenges that some airlines may face in relation to larger ones. There's a fear that some local airlines may become uncompetitive. And as a region of small developing states in the Caribbean, this is perhaps one of the biggest challenges when it comes to air liberalization with countries that where there are more competitive airlines operate. So I would say that it's important that countries liberalize at their own pace that is consistent with their economic interests. And of course, based on principles of fair competition. We had a question earlier about subsidies and the impact that has on how airlines operate. And I think that it's important to, in terms of leveling the playing field of competition, global frameworks developed by ICAO, for example, on which forms of subsidy is acceptable and which are not, should be used to provide clarity on those issues so that that challenge can be addressed in that regard. And in the short term, I think another suggestion in relation to that particular challenge would be for carriers to provide more transparency on the operating subsidies they receive. Another main challenge, I would say, from the ACS perspective, especially in relation to the negotiation and adoption of the ACS Air Liberalization Agreement, has to do with the regulatory variances that exist between the various member states across the Greater Caribbean region. There is another regulatory challenge for a global industry like aviation is that it is subject to international rules on safety and interoperability, but there's also a heterogeneous series of national regulatory frameworks, and balancing those two make up a complex patchwork of rules and regulations that have to be coordinated to avoid the operational inefficiencies that could undermine the operations of airlines. And to answer the second part of your question, that has to do with well, I would call them the obvious benefits of air liberalization, because as the ACS is a strong proponent of air liberalization in the Greater Caribbean. This air transport connectivity, but air transport in particular is very critical to the survival of economies of Caribbean islands, as well as continental Latin America as well. Global business and tourism, due to the speed and convenience with which it connects visitor source markets and regional destinations. In terms of trade, air freight accounts for approximately 35% of global trade, and it is very excessive in terms of the value. And we live in a market where there is an increased expectation from businesses and consumers for greater supply chain responsiveness, and wherein lies the increase in e-commerce, for example. So I think that air transport is the answer to addressing that increased demand for supply chain responsiveness and a more efficient distribution network. those are some of my initial thoughts to your questions. I look forward to the discussion with the other panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Safia. Very interesting points. I think what you raised about size of airlines and how they are affected by other competitors and how they need to phase out. I think that's a very important point. And has to do with the previous topic we discussed about ownership, right? So how the environment and the regulatory framework allows for this different ownership and even partnership with between airlines, right? So I think this is one of the areas that we definitely could explore more. And I also invite the other panelists to comment on that later. Just to make some advertisement here, you mentioned about trade and cargo transportation. We are about to finish another study on air cargo in the region, so it's forthcoming soon. So we will share with the states as well. Thank you, Safia. I want to switch again to Spanish. Jaime, te quería preguntar un poco
Jaime, I wanted to ask you a bit with regard to the CLAC role that the CLAC plays here, both in the multilateral aspects context. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you see the elaboration of those agreements, and also what is the role these bilateral agreements play?
frentes?
We all know that there are efforts in both fronts. Many times in that effort that Safia is mentioning, each country needs to understand the speed that it's going to be moved in that direction. So I would like to have a little insight on how CLAC is participating and what's your vision in this segment. Thank you so much, Reynaldo. I would like to start with, well, congratulating the IDB and the participation of the ICAO. I think this is a great forum to give our first steps in a post-COVID era. So what is the CLAC role? As you know, this is the Latin American Commission for Civil Aviation, and with 22 member states, and it's a liberation and coordination forum. We cannot force the states to have sessions, although they are participating, or not many of these regulations can be applied in all the states. So we are in this opening path. CLAC has played two main roles. One is the monitoring of observation of the multilateral initiatives that we have in Latin America and in the Caribbean. In the 90s, the community, the CAN, made a main decision in the Andean region. Remember that in 2004, we implemented a 582 regulation, and this is an effort that we have been observed in different markets, because this is an integration initiative and it's quite important. In the same token, there in the Mercosur, there is the strength agreement, and that agreement allows, notwithstanding to establish bilateral agreements, but to establish air services that may be operating.
In several meetings of CAN, we have strength meetings. Also CARICOM services and other initiatives in the Caribbean.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Sorry, Pauline? Yeah. Puedes seguir.
Pauline?
Are you hearing me? Good morning.
We can hear you, Pauline.
Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
¿Me escuchan? Sí, sí, te oímos. ¿Tienes
Can you
algún
hear me?
comentario?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you, Pauline, and I guess the others can.
Okay, good morning. First thing, on behalf of the Secretariat, I'd like to thank IDB and
Primero que nada, a nombre de
congratulate all the
el secretariado, quiero
participants.
felicitar a los participantes.
This meeting is very timely for all of us.
Es muy
The
útil esta
context
reunión
of
para
the
todos. En
CARICOM
el
member states
contexto
and
de los
CARICOM,
miembros de CARICOM
we
y CARICOM,
have established a multilateral
hemos
air services
establecido
agreement,
un acuerdo
which in its
multilateral para
context,
servicios y en su contexto
has heralded a new era for the threshold of our regional air transport, in addition to creating a
hemos creado
liberalized
adicionalmente
environment
el ambiente para
consistent
la
with emerging world
liberalización
trade WTO aviation policies
con
and
la
the revised treaty of
WTO.
Chaguaramas. The MASA will no doubt
Hemos
contribute to the
tenido algunas
stimulation of regional
pláticas
growth in the air
sobre lo que es
transport
la
sector and
estimulación del
development of
crecimiento en el
regional air
sector aéreo
transport,
y el
an
desarrollo
important
regional de
component of the
transporte,
single
y
market
que
and
es
key
un complemento
factor
muy
for
importante para
affecting
el
regional
mercado y un
integration.
factor clave para la
In this
integración.
context and
En
to
este
date, I
contexto
wish
y
to
hasta la
report
fecha me gustaría
that the
reportar
MASA is
que
enforced
MASA
among 11 of our 15 member states.
le
It
ha
is,
dado poder a 11
as
de
I
nuestros
said,
15
member
estados
states have also,
y nuestros
in
estados
accordance with
miembros,
particular
de acuerdo
articles
con
of this
con el
agreement,
articulado
have
del
designated
acuerdo,
the carriers.
han
We
designado
also
los
have,
carriers.
to advance this process,
Y para
the heads of
seguir
government have
dándole movimiento
approved
a este
the
acuerdo, se ha
implementation of the
aprobado la
MASA for cargo.
implementación
Now,
de los mismos.
as you might be familiar with,
Como
in the
ustedes
context of
seguramente
CARICOM,
estarán
we
familiarizados en el
have these
contexto de
policies and so in
CARCOM,
place,
tenemos
but
estas políticas
operationalization and
implementadas en lo que es la
implementation is always our
operacionalidad
challenge.
y la
And
implementación,
at
bueno,
this
sabemos
stage,
que
this is
siempre
where
es un
we
reto. En
are.
este momento es donde
Member states
estamos
have not,
actualmente. Los
although the
estados
MASA is in
miembros
force, we have not started
no
to
hemos
operationalize
empezado
or
a
implement this agreement.
operacionalizar o implementar todos
I
estos
heard the
artículos.
speaker before,
Escuché
Ms.
al
Reed,
orador
spoke
anterior,
to
señor Reed,
what
que
it can cause in the context of our
habló sobre
air services.
el
But I'm
contexto
a
de las
strong believer, and
superficies
I want to make
terrestres
a
y
disclaimer here. This is
creo,
not
y quiero
CARICOM. This is
hacer aquí
Dr.
un
Yearwood in her
disclaimer, solo
capacity as
soy la
an
doctora
aviation
Yearwood
specialist.
hablando en este
I
momento,
think
no
in
hablo en nombre
environments
de mi
like these
organización.
and
Hay
with
ambientes
the
como este
development of
y
policies and
el
procedure,
desarrollo de las
the
políticas y
industry then
procedimientos son
develops to
importantes.
the fittest, survival of the fittest. What is going to happen, and
¿Qué
I
es lo
see
que
with
va
the
a
MASA,
suceder?
we are going to, I'm very excited to see this in operation.
Y
It's
en lo que
because
se
of its
refiere ya a la
uniqueness, the
operacionalidad.
MASA in its context, I
Pues,
think when we
en su
compare with
contexto,
other air serve similar agreements, we
y
have
estamos de
the
acuerdo
free exercise of first, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, eighth, ninth freedom. It enable, as I said, it is the liberalized air tariff for intra-regional operations and the unrestricted frequency and capacity, and the full liberalization of cargo and passenger services. Now, it is also, as I said, enforced at a timely period for us, because one of the things our region is grappling with coming out of the COVID is food security. So I see this being operationalized first in the movement of cargo, and I said, which we have approval for. In the context of, and I see the development of the third tier operators in this context, what is going to be required, and I'm seeing it's a case where you might have to have and this is where I see the IDB coming in, financing of aviation services. The fact that we have this agreement in place, if we are going to see this coming from the private sector developmental and from the private sector developing this instrument, also having this enforced and so on, operationalize, there will be the need for financing of the aviation sector, and that needs to be an area addressed by aviation development for the region, especially in the Caribbean area. Understanding that, one, the government, the state-owned the state-owned operations, as you see, are very limited, considering that as developing states, priority is, in the context of aviation, safety. Governments would not hesitate on that. But in the context of prioritization, we have the health, education, and so forth that are always, priority for development. So in all fairness, you're going to see our aviation sector coming out of this agreement. I see it more so in the context of the private sector. And where I would like IDB and the international agencies to help us focus on is helping develop our regional operators. I use example, this country where we're situated, Guyana, and I must at this point commend, I noticed that there are on the system and in this meeting, commend the directorship and also the civil aviation of Guyana. They have done an extremely great job in developing the third-tier operators, of course, because of the minerals and so, and the use of these for the interior operations. However, now with that, as I said, expanding into helping move the regional foods and so on, they would need support. You'll also see support will be required for the development of airports. We haven't spoken to those things coming out of the liberalization of aviation. You have to look at the environmental, the facilities. Those will have to be addressed. So all in all, as I said, we are now trying to have our master operationalize. What we are hoping for by the as the CARICOM celebrates its 50th anniversary, we want to see the condition for a single security check for direct transit passengers on multi-stop intercommunity flights. Understanding that we move with the member states that are able to do so. We cannot have everyone moving at the same time because of the developmental stages. And I'll also take this opportunity to, on behalf of the Secretariat, to thank ICAO for their work in helping us with the member states that are not so compliant, getting them in order that we could effect this condition for the single security check.
Thank you, Mrs. Pauline. I think you touched very interesting points. I want to go back with that when you mentioned about the role of IDB. I think the final session we can discuss that. We have some examples in the Caribbean. You mentioned the issue of the implementation of the agreements. I think, and then I want to go back to Jaime. Jaime, perdón el problema de comunicación. Sorry, we have a communication problem, so I couldn't go back to you. Pero quería volver un poco también con esta reflexión.
And I would like also then later on to go back to Pauline's reflection. Yes, this reflection, it is very important. I was talking about the CARICOM initiative. The CLAC role is monitoring all these multilateral efforts on air integration, and also outside Latin America, we saw things being done in Africa, liberalization efforts in the United States. In 2010, CLAC adopted a multilateral agreement on open skies, and it is in the phase of providing the member states with an instrument to liberalize skies. What's the object or the goal? To have open skies, merely that. And it is important to say that the title, the object, and the motive of this treaty is to have open skies. And I'm going to see this short. And liberalize until the sixth freedom. Less than that, it is not an agreement of open skies. And this is important, and this must be said because there are sometimes reserves of rights, and it allows reserves in general. Having said that, we would understand that all the states that want to adhere do it, thinking that they will be part of an open sky policy, and that we would have a sixth freedom opening. There's another initiative regarding this, and it refers to the Memorandum of Understanding of the Liberalization of Air Cargo of the bilateral and multilateral agreements in such a way that for the crisis and only for the crisis, the member states signing these agreements through an email, for example, could liberalize air cargo. Many states will do it at the end of this year, I know, but this allowed to have a reflection in order so as to know what we can do. And Reynaldo, what's the role of bilateral agreements in the liberalization process? I would like to be here very audacious and saying that we have had a lack of success in the world because we were not able to agree in the agreement of Chicago to have open skies. And since it was not possible, the answer was the need to have bilateral agreements. But the bilateral agreements really cause chaos, very difficult chaos, generating more problems than solutions. So the answer post-COVID crisis should be multilateral agreements. And we are not making progress with bilateral agreements. We only have 9 countries in CLAC, in the open sky multilateral agreements. Also 9 states participating in liberalization of the cargo, and respecting sovereignty. We are flexible, and we understand that there are countries that are flexible and some others that are not. And there are some other states that prefer to protect their air companies and are not available for an open sky policy. So I know that there are a different speed in certain parts of the world, and that's the way things are in Latin America. We have instruments that can be used to integrate ourselves in our area regarding commercial aviation and do it right now. But there is a policy in several states that do things or want things to be done in a different way, and it seems that there is always an excuse so that things are not done. This is the COVID, but the same things have happened in other years. For example, when leaving the World War II, and there's always an excuse to delay this policy. This is a long-term solution that we're seeing, But there are instruments that CLAC had made available, but there's still a long way to go because we should build these instruments in the region. Either the Caribbean is part of the LACAC or CLAC or whatever, but we should look for instruments to liberalize the airs. And this is still a pending struggle. Thank you. Jaime, thank you. It is very clear what you have said. You have posed an audacious challenge, as you said, from the Inter-American Development Bank point of view. We understand the sovereignty of each country and the decisions in each country, but what we can do is to see this evidence and to use these forums to help in the process to evolve. Of course, each country has their inner complexities, and everything we can do to support this position is a positive effort. I would like to talk about the Chilean example, Martin. Under this understanding, there is a vision of multilateral agreements, but also a multilateral vision that could be homogeneous. Chile is clearly an example of a country that has taken the first steps. So we would like to hear Martin. Jaime, you said something very important things, but now it is Martin's turn to talk about the most important instrument, the institutional, in the market, regulatory, in order to have and to make progress in this liberalization process. I'm glad to share Chile's experience. Ours has been a successful experience regarding air transportation in the last 40 years and also in the last time and age. This is based on our geographical need. We have a very specific geographical location away from several urban centers in the world. We have a geography where air transportation is key in our connection, the domestic one and the international one. And that's why since 40 years ago, we decided to advance in an open sky policy with 5 very well established pillars like the free access to work, with minimum requirements, of course, safety and regulatory, then the regulatory tariff regulation of air control, minimal intervention of authority regarding trade in tariffs, and lastly, something very important, and it has allowed us in 4 years to have a stability that has not changed depending on the different political parties, because this has allowed Chile to have agreements with more than 80 countries, and some of them even open in cabotage of foreign airlines in Chile. And these agreements have been bilateral instrument with different opening degrees and also multilateral agreements. There are some agreements like Fortaleza and Malia that have been very important for us. And this last agreement of the 7th freedom agreement during the COVID and has been very good to prepare ourselves for future crises. I would like to go to Alfonso And I would like to ask him his opinion from the outside of the region, seeing it from the European point of view, lessons learned that we could apply, because listening all these challenges and all these processes that we are going through as a region, your opinion could be very interesting. Alfonso, thank you very much. I would like to have your perspective. Thank you very much for your invitation. This is a very interesting subject. From the European point of view, we have a very long experience. We started liberalizing our skies at the beginning of the 90s, because we think that liberalization regarding air traffic is the result of using policies to leverage the economic growth of the European Union. This is one of the most important motives that we have heard. I've heard that liberalization means economic growth, richness. This is a very important factor. In Europe, the experience is very close to the one that was mentioned in the introduction, when we are talking about more than 600 billion euros in 2014, that are the last consolidated figures that we have. And we are also talking that each euro that is spent in the air industry generates 3 euros in the European economy. And each euro invested in labor gives rise to other 3 jobs in the productive system in Europe. From that point of view, I will not go into more details. I could give them to you later on, but I don't want to interrupt the cadence and the rhythm of the discussion now. Of course, I would like to make clear that a reduction of 60% in airfares was reached. More than 100 airlines were created with this liberalization. And also take into consideration that the number of passengers have become 3 times larger. From the point of view, any point of view that you want to analyze the benefits of liberalization, they are so big, so huge, that we shouldn't even discuss it. So this is one of the most important motive. And the second one that is very interesting, and it would be worthwhile highlighting, and Mr. Rabani talked about it, Bernarda Franco talked about it, and Juan also talked about it. And it has to do with the institutional framework. It is necessary, an institutional framework, if we want to establish a profound liberalization of the different markets, where we can control that air companies should be operating in equal conditions. So for that, it is important to have an institutional framework. Of course, authorities should exist to monitor and control that regulations have been complied with. And in the second place, we have the legal pillar. We have to have also a regulatory framework, a legal framework under whose umbrella we can act, because airport operators or service providers should be worked under this juridical or legal framework. You have talked about this, but I would like to emphasize that this is very important. We've done it in Europe, and everybody in the world is doing it. Provide the separation between the regulator and the service suppliers. This is fundamental. This is key. How to make progress Well, in Europe, we are willing to offer our help, and help in the sense of technical aid. We can work with you. We are working with you with the 2 regional offices of ICAO. We have an aviation project ongoing. We've been talking with several leaders in the regions, and we can offer, based on our experience, the technical elements that could be helpful for you. And we do that under the standards of the ICAO, or we do it in specific subjects that we are asked to leverage with. And we will continue to work with you in the coming years in a more strong way. And the moment I disembark in Panama as representative, I will be closer, and I will be able to devote time in situ to reinforce these relationships. And also, going back to what we are talking about, we have to understand what is lacking. So we are lacking a legal framework. And behind this legal framework, and under the umbrella of it, be able to rule these aspects. As Don Jaime said, we will be at a global level depending on bilateral agreements, and we don't want that because they are chaos. They bring problems. We know what it is about in the European Union. And at the end, everything depends on the political will. Either they want to or not, as Mr. Jaime Binder said. And it depends on the political party if they want, and after a period of time, they don't. So we will go into further detail, let's say detailing what need to be contained in this legal framework. So we need the legal framework and the institutional framework in order to liberalize all these open skies conditions. Alfonso, thank you very much. For time purposes, we cannot make another round. The discussion has been very fruitful and very helpful, very detailed. There is a dialogue after this meeting. I would emphasize regarding what the Caribbean area said, the agreements multilateral, the airlines subject, small airlines in the Caribbean, how to make that transition. And that happens due to the ownership, the regulatory frameworks. Talking about the Caribbean area, it is important to see and to approach in an integral part. The Dominican Republic and Chile are examples of changes in regulations, of progresses made, and all this agenda is very interesting and we agree upon it. I really thank you, and I open for questions. We have 10 minutes. Diego, I don't know if we already have questions in the chat or we should open it. Well, we don't have yet, but we can open the floor to the participants. You can raise your hand.
I would like to make a last reflection, if you allow me. If there are no questions, I would like to make a last reflection. I don't think there are more questions right now. Go ahead.
I do have a question to Alfonso. This is Dr. Yearwood. you did indicate that you have, you look at, you're willing to work with us. In the context of our MASA, we are currently among ourselves. There were some built-in agenda which looked at essentials, air services, and subsidies. Have you addressed that in any of the, with the ones you did with Chile? And would you be willing to kind of have a chat with you probably after this meeting in this context?
Pauline, you mean in the context of the technical assistance that we are going to provide with the project? You mean in that context?
Yes, certainly, certainly.
All right. So we will address in time, but not for the moment. We are not addressing market access related issues. We are focusing on aviation safety and air traffic management areas and support all these specific technical aviation safety areas, from airworthiness to air traffic management, aerodromes, as I said, operations, et cetera, that we are identifying bilaterally. Well, they are basically identified by the beneficiary states, right, or organizations, and they request us to give assistance on those fronts. We're talking assistance in the context of SSPs. I mean, you have today with us Melvin Sintrod and Fabio Rabani, and they can give you a full list of what we are discussing with our different regional offices. But we intend in the future to address market access. It's only that we have not started with that yet, because the technical assistance that we are providing now, it's sort of building up on the first project that finalized in December last year. We already launched our first project with Latin America, and then we are building up on that. And the market access domain or area, if you wish, was not there in the beginning, but is part of the project in itself. I mean, if you have a look at the terms of reference of the project, we can deal with market access related issues, and this has to make sense. If we agree on providing technical assistance on market access related issues, it has to make sense, and it means that we need to be mutually, the European Union and the beneficiary countries in question, exploring the possibility of moving towards a market access situation, if you see what I mean. So yes, we keep depending on the evolution on these discussions. I will also, from Panama, I will be in charge of sounding out the different authorities and the different stakeholders, industries, stakeholders in Latin America and Caribbean, to explore what's the appetite on each other's sides, on the European and on your side, about moving towards a closer relationship on market access and establishing liberalization agreements, open skies agreements, as we call them. But as we have to take practical steps. If you really ask me, okay, if there is a possibility now to discuss this kind of technical assistance with the Caribbean, my answer would be no, because we have not undertaken any step in that sense with any country of the Caribbean. However, with CASOS, we have already, we're in contact, and we are exploring and designing technical assistance in other aviation safety areas. But for market access and liberalization, we have to take practical steps. Otherwise, I don't see what would be the point of investing on specific technical assistance.
Thank you. I just want to also reiterate that the MASA the objective of this is to establish measures to promote the adoption of uniform standards and recommended practices for the provision of the air transport services and ensuring uniformity in licenses and certification of aviation personnel within the community. So I'm fully aware of the work you're doing with CASUS. Again, we'd like to thank you on behalf of that. And it was in that context I was asking if you're moving into market access, but it's good to see that that is also on the burner, even if it is on the back burner at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. Maybe in 1 year or 2 years, we're in a different scenario. Let's see.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Alfonso. We have a question from Eduardo.
Bueno, sí, tengo una pregunta, no sé si esa es una pregunta provocadora.
Well, yes, I do have a question. Not sure if this is quite provoking question. This is for Jaime. Thank you so much for your presentation. All the presentations and all the interventions were excellent. Well, my question is addressed. In your perspective, which would be the 3 barriers about these agreements not progressing in the way we wanted, although we see clear economic benefits and reduction of impact, etc. But the question would be like a future reflection. Which are these 3 barriers? Because there are some countries that are reluctant to adopt these liberalization techniques or regulations. So that would be my question in order to elaborate about that. Would you please? Well, your question is not simple, but we have been thinking about this topic. Well, the first thing is that there is a distance, there is a gap between the economic authority and the aeronautic authority, except for some exceptions where the development model is closely linked to the aviation development. For instance, we have heard the experience in Dominican Republic. They have it very clear, and they are willing to do this. Okay, so in this case study, it has been an exception, but there is a certain distance. The development model is not even close to the aviation, because the aviation is not the core of all these. It's like everything is like managed like serendipity. Air transportation in Latin America and the Caribbean is the one promoting tourism, and the other one is generating all the virtuous factors. And the second one, which is even more complex, is there are many created interests. If I am an airline protected in the country, I want to be protected. I want to remain protected. And of course, from the stakeholders and the airlines point of view, there is some pressure, but there is an environment to carry on with this protection. And there are some airlines that have more power in some countries as well. So there are some interests created already in order not to move or amend this public policy. So this is also a barrier. And there is another one that has to do with the legitimate approximation of the states. And this is the main discussion that we always find. They always say, I need to protect my national or domestic airline because we have to protect the employment. And also we have some policies implemented to protect this company. Or I need this airline to perform certain services, geographically speaking, that nobody wants to do. And this is quite difficult to express because it is not against the intuition, but it seems reasonable to protect the workers of airline company in case of opening and regulation and more competitiveness that may take the risk. The experience that we have from Chile, and Martin knows it very well by now, the more competitiveness, the more the employments will be created. So many airlines are asking lots of things. And so this is a virtuous effect of the liberalization. However, before this is cost. There are many examples in the world. As of year 78, when the United States started, we have some bankruptcies in the airlines. So there is a first effect in the market where it can be produced at liberalization, certain unemployment, but in the midterm and in the speed of the 21st century, I would say it'll be amended quickly. There is a path and there is a space of total openness. And with certain speed, there is a sector that is demanding rapidly and they are hiring as well. But however, this with the sessions with the pilots is not being regarded in such a way. They need to be protected. They want to feel protected. This is not simple. This is not a straight answer, you know. And here we have the seizure of the confirmation, the behavior. The people who are on behalf of these, they listen the examples by the Dominican Republic and Chile, and they only see or regard these arguments on their behalf. And they are going to look for another evidence, as the one I just mentioned, to say, I cannot do it. And if I do it, I will do it in my pace, okay? But, and it's not that way, you know, because I need to be looking after employment, and I need to be looking after my routes, and other airlines that are operating in the country, I need to protect them, and they are performing other activities and towards a place that is not profitable. I have mentioned certain ones, but apropos the question of Juan Camil, when we look for to open the markets, of course, airlines come along, of course, focus on the safety and with the highest standards. And it may happen that a subsidiary company, and the example now is clear. We know clearly that there are companies behind third countries that have that rely on strong economic financing in Latin America and the Caribbean. So an unloyal competence can be produced, and because some of them are going to be subsidized and the other ones are going to keep the previous subsidizing. How are we going to solve that? We are going to solve that the moment they go in, because we will have a free competitiveness. And if there is no other regulation, the multilateral and bilateral agreements will always pray for the free competitiveness. And notwithstanding if the airline is coming along with a subsidized help in order to address the future opening market. So we need some regulations to allow access of these companies, but also we need to keep the free and healthy competitiveness. But we do not have to wait until this to happen, because we should find a balance. Firstly, we need to place the institutions. This is a joke, okay? We have the financing institutions to have some institutionalization, and then we are going to have the problem of migration in order to achieve this openness. And don't you forget that the aviation is regulated to the technical aspects, but we are talking about the regularization and eventually the monitoring capacity that is already existing in certain states that are protecting will be devious, and as long as they are celebrating that or accomplishing that. But this is not making us to monitor more. Eventually, we are going to do the monitoring in a very, very less way. But the companies may be public, private, mix or joint ventures. But those companies should have equal conditions for competitiveness in our market. And that is our effort. And within all this, and all in all, barriers are the interests that are created. And of course, these forums are allowing us to discuss and knock down certain myths and carry on and overcome these problems. Thank you so much, Jaime. We need to carry on with the second session, but we have two raised hands, Juan and Fabio. Fabio says, thank you, Reynaldo. I only, maybe this is a translation problem, but the terminology Jaime was using, I think it was monitoring the services and do the follow-up in the agreements. As far as I understand, is what we are always looking for is to evaluate the impact, the regulation impact, because it is demanding for more data and the impact on how this will impact in the operations. But I know that there should be well, the monitoring is a good word then, but we need to do the follow-up of a policy or of a deregulation. But that is not an intervention as far as I know. So I would like to understand this terminology, the term that you use, and I would like to understand how are you going to apply when you say we are not going to monitor that much. Okay, thank you, says Jaime. We have two approaches. First of all, we need to analyze the policy, the public policy in itself. And as you say, Fabio, we have to investigate all the time in order to accomplish or fulfill with the public policies. Here we are going to do monitoring and research, and we have the public policy in itself. If you have a restrictive public policy, obviously you need to have some capacity to observe that lots of requirements be fulfilled, created already to impede to create or to have a trade. Only the traffic right, you need to review each bilateral in order to see, and there we are going to do the monitoring. So you are going to release some human resources in order to achieve these. And yeah, I concur with you that we need to have fresh information on the table and be scientific in the implementation of our public policies. So the application of the public policy, only when you deregulate the air market, we are not talking about technicalities because we need to follow the script. We need to go in deep. There we have to have a big monitoring effort. Thank you so much, Jaime. I knew what you meant, but I wanted you to be clear, and thank you for your points. Thank you for your explanation. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Fabio. And I would like to thank all the panelists, Jafia, Jaime, Alfonso Martin, and Pauline. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much, because I think we have a very interesting discussion and with different perspectives, the Caribbean, the CLAG, the ICAO, many. I think it's a very complex topic, but I think we have a good agenda in order to carry on. So now I am going to give the floor to Diego for the next presentation. Thank you so much, says Diego. I would like to have more time for this discussion. That was quite interesting. Thank you so much for your contributions. There are lots of challenges ahead, and we need to face them. Well, for the last session, this is going to deal with terminology, technology, and so I am going to invite the Deputy Director of the NAC office, Julio Siu, to be the moderator of this next session with regard to the studies performed with the ICAO and also Reynaldo's work. I think this is a great opportunity for the interest to be accomplished. Thank you so much. Julio, the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. Well, this last session, what we're looking for is to do a wrap up of about this webinar and also look for well, get to know if it was of benefit to you. So I will start thanking you all for the support provided and but to do a recap, a quick recap of this webinar. We started talking about the general references with regard to from the ICAO with regard to standards and guidelines and the set-aside, my set-aside colleague, he explained how this type of data exchange has been performed. Later on, we had the participation of Reinaldo, providing us with the perspective of the IDB and how they are looking to support the development of the region in itself with this type of interventions. And there have been some mentions of several states that have received this support in coordination with the IDB. Well, in the next session, we went into the details of case studies that were performed and achieved in coordination with the IDB and the ICAO. Regarding, well, we have the examples of Brazil and the Dominican Republic examples. And there on the chat, we shared the links. And also we explained the type of exercises and analysis that were performed and the insight that we had in those experiences, trying to explain a little bit which are the benefits and the achievements with regard to this type of studies. And in this last session that we are going to have, so I thank you all for being here, and I hope this is going to be very active. So I do thank the participation, as Reynaldo was saying, an excellent session of panelists, because we have the participation from the CARICOM, the SASI, and the Dr. Jirgood from CARICOM participation, and also the participation of Jaime from La Clark, and also the interventions by Chile and Brazil, etc. So this panel was quite interactive on how it was and how we regard liberalization. So in the objectives of this webinar is to promote liberalization of air transportation market. And for that reason, we are providing you with the context about regulations and standards, and we are also providing you with the tools. Many of this information is favoring each of the states and it's guiding them properly to allow a little bit the development of what would be the aviation sector. We have talked about institutional framework with regard to as for importance it is about, and we also have seen the importance of making the aviation to become an actor or a catalyzing element in our country, particularly in many countries where we already said or mentioned the figures of the impact that the aviation is having in the tourism sector and in the country's development. So it'll be like a national agreement in order within a country plan in order to develop this plan. So in this last attempt is how we are going to do it as they have done it in Europe. So quickly, this last section of next steps, what we are looking for is this, for the states to be able and share which are your concerns in the utilization of these studies, the studies that have been available at the ICAO level or IDB level or financed by other sources to favor the state. And in turn, I wanted to add the performance and data providence in order to analyze the aviation sector. And this is only to say that in the next assembly of the ICAO, you will have the opportunity to see the access to information as a dashboard, as upon demand, for you to see how we developed the air transportation in each sector and in each country. That, adding up to certain level of information, may help your states to be growing and generating this synergy in aviation. And therefore, the liberalization of the air transport market is one of the key elements that we are looking for to have in the region. Well, this being said, I would like to give the floor to the participants here in order for them to share what are their experiences. I know that Reynaldo has shared that you already have some projects with the Bahamas, and there are other studies, sorry, that are being made, because we are enhancing, and that in the end will have to be reflected in the impact on behalf of the state. Uh, how this sector favored employment, etc. So this is a mechanic that we are looking for to be applied by all these states, as it was applied by the Dominican Republic in its very moment. And it's a little bit an approach and the interest of the state to promote this type of exchange, and of course to express not only at domestic level, because this is a great job, but it's at national level, it's a country level. We need to look for this approach, and the IDB that was supporting us, and we carried out and we conducted a study between the BID and the ICAO in order to accompany this project integrally on what it was being done in the Dominican Republic. We went to the Civil Aviation Board, and they were working together in order to achieve this and make this real. So I would like to share a little bit what is your concern or your query with regard to methodology that you would like to apply, if it's the interest or the commitment of each state? We have already heard from the CED partners the availability. Whenever you may require any type of study, the collaboration and this information, this help is at the reach of your hand, because they are there for you. But maybe for the IDB, Reynaldo, can you share a bit if is the state interested in that type of studies? Which are the steps that need to be followed in order to achieve that? Reynaldo says, thank you, Julio. As I was saying in the beginning, LB works, the IDB works in different dimensions, and specifically speaking about studies, the important thing here is the state to have contact, obviously, with us and the air transport team, etc. Because our contacts are open and available, but also we need to involve our specialists in the country. Each country has an IDB specialist regarding transportation issues, and they can help us understand a little bit that demand. Then, if we are going to conduct a specific study for the country or at regional level, the next step would be to talk with the economy and the Hacienda or Treasury Department that is going to handle or manage all these, the money in the country. So we need to do some planning, and but are going to define if we need to approve a specific resource. Well, I would do this first. We need to know about the demand. Then we are going to discuss this with the country specialist. Sometimes we have some availability of resources or define the priorities in the country. And the third step, there will be the structuring of it, with the Ministry of Economy. Those would be the main steps. Okay, Reynaldo, I think you have mentioned something that is important and that we have seen this in several states, the participation of the finance and economic entity of the country for us to have an integral approach in this country, in this type of support. Yeah, that's right, that's right. And sometimes what happens with regard to the experience that we have, many times is the aviation topic is not a priority in the transportation agenda. For instance, we have a financing that it's dedicated to highways, motorways, airports, and has not necessarily included the aviation.
So that would be an effort that we can undertake. This is a sectorial side, the sectorial side. Then we would talk to the person in charge of defining the priorities. We talk with people here in Washington. Eduardo and myself and other two people are already in line and that could initiate that dialogue and define the best way to go. Thank you. And I'm aware that the Inter-American Development Bank is making efforts in the Caribbean and South America. So thank you to the bank for these efforts. For those states who want studies, I would like to say that regarding studies, we have as an example, the one conducted in the Dominican Republic, and these studies can be applied to other states. And those states in turn can promote them as part of the social economic development plan. Eduardo, you have your hand raised. I would like just to complement what Reynaldo said. Also, the states can get together in groups of 2 or 3 states, and next year apply for a call. We have disseminated this kind of ICAO events. These technical resources studies are available. There are institutions as la CLAC, la CAG, and ICAO that are institutions that are always applying to these calls. So states can form groups and be part of a joint effort. And maybe if you identify that there's a problem or a deficiency or a lack of knowledge in certain field, we can support you with the development of the technical advice, the development of the proposal. But in this case, it would be an initiative coming from the member states. And it has proved to be very useful. This is an annual proposal, and in next years you could apply and we could guide you through this application. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you very much. When it comes to the Caribbean area, the regional scope is very important, and it has allowed us to evolve in the air field. So the regional scope is also very, very useful. So thank you, Eduardo, for that clarification. And as I said, if there are some other member states that are interested in making an application for a study, of course, the ICAO and the regional offices are here at your disposal to analyze as partners with EASA and other institutions or associations. Yes, go ahead, Jaime. Jaime, take the floor, please. Yes, thank you very much, Julio. Regarding to two things, there's a study from the bank regarding cargo that I'm anxiously waiting for. And number two, these studies on the regional scope could encourage many countries to it, because the first step in Latin America or Caribbean would be to liberate. The first step could be to liberate cargo. And once we have the cargo liberalized, we could go ahead. We have the experience that there are some regions where nobody opposed to the liberalization of cargo. So we could start there. Now, the distribution of information would be for next year, but in the midterm, we could come down with regional strategies, and we could work on a regional project. Now, the last thing I would like to say, Julio, to reinforce the online course, Jaime said something very important. After a liberalization process, there's the need, the professional need, maybe with another profile even. Regarding this course, we've had very good feedback. It is an introductory course, but maybe some states could hire some professionals through this certification. So we invite you to participate in the course, disseminate the information, give us feedback because we welcome it. Organizations have technical courses more in depth. Our objective shouldn't be to intervene, but it gives a solid foundation to educate the staff in this sense. Thank you, Jaime, for your positive comment. Yes, the intention is to work regionally, but also, Reynaldo, to encourage this kind of reunions with the different states, because each state, of course, will have a different way to recover from the pandemic. Here we can see the what has been done in other geographical areas and take it as a role model. Well, having mentioned this, the doors are open for the states that want to start working with the different studies to leverage what you can do. These are tools that you have available. I hope you can make good use of them. And it will be easier in the future to get together. And Diego, I will give you the floor finally. Julio, thank you very much. Eduardo, Reynaldo, Jaime, thank you for your comments. I think that this is the end. We have gone 10 minutes beyond the limit, but I would like to thank all the participants for your participation in the event, for the initiatives of several important actions of what we have to do, especially on regional focus. it is important to have in mind that the cargo transportation is important for the economic development, and that we have very important tools here that we could use in that process. As we have seen, there's still a long way to go. We know the importance of the different forums in the ICAO, the discussions of multilateral agreements. But before closing the event, I would like to give the word to Julio and Reynaldo. Thank you for your comments. I would now ask you to open your cameras to take the picture, the official picture of the event. I ask you to be patient because there are several pages of participants. So please turn on your cameras.
¿Listo, Dora?
Un momentito, por favor.
Sí, claro.
Porque son varias páginas.
Please be patient. Give me a minute. There are several pages to take pictures of.
¿Cuántas páginas son, Mariel?
Mariel, do you know how many pages of participants do we have?
Creo que ya, un momentito.
I think we are
Cuatro.
almost done. 4 pages. Yes, we have 4 pages. Dora, thank you very much. Thank you to you all. So as I said, Reynaldo, Julio, please, your last closing words. I don't want to make this event any longer, but again, appreciate the bank, all the team of the bank for this great idea, for this webinar with the presence of all the states to share the studies. Also thank, in the name of our 2 regional directors, Dr. Mavis Cintron of the NAC and Mr. Fabio Rani, and my colleagues of air transportation. Thank you for being present. Thank you for sharing this information. Thank you for allowing us with the organization of this webinar. This is part of what we are looking for, especially after the COVID era. We are still in the recovery stage. But thank you for all the efforts, the strengthening efforts and the efforts to make aviation more dynamic and be part of the socio-economical growth in each of our states. Thank you for the participation we've had from Brazil, Dominican Republic, Chile, CARICOM, Caribbean States Organization, ACLAC, LACAC. All of them have actively organized and participated in these talks. They are an active part of the progress towards the dynamism that I mentioned in all the region and all the sector. I hope the webinar had been useful. I also hope that you can comment it and disseminate the ideas with your colleagues and the application of ideas for the use of these studies, and having in the future this kind of promotion and the sharing you made of the results. Diego, thank you for your role as MC, Dora, Maria, everybody that has been backstage, being part of the organization. Thank you for the interpreters that have worked so well in this webinar and all of you that have participated. Thank you very much. Reynaldo, I give you the floor now.
I just want to thank you, Melvin, Fabio, Julio, Diego, and all the team, all the states for their discussion and patience to hear us. I hope we can keep this channel open. At the IDB, we are working all the states in the region, and we are ready to work with you guys. I also want to invite ICAO to strengthen our partnership. I think not only in this topic here today, but we have many other topics that we are working, and our purpose is to strengthen this even further. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Reynaldo, Julio. Hasta.
Good day. Bye-bye.
Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you, everyone.
Gracias
Bye.
a todos. Ya nos vemos. Cuídense.
Thank you to you all. Take care of yourselves.
Much thanks from the bombers.